Cameras roll.
Today is June 3rd, 2016. I'm Adrienne Falaise, and it is my honor to be interviewing Leslie Uggams for the Archive of American Television, and we're here in New York City.
That's me.
All right, part one down. Okay. All right. So thank you for sitting down with us today, Leslie.
Thank you.
So we'd just like to start with some background information. So what was your name at birth?
Leslie Marion Uggams.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in New York City, and the hospital that I was born in was called Women's Hospital, which later on became St. Luke's Hospital. And I was one of the first black babies born in this hospital.
Oh. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Washington Heights, and near Edgecombe Avenue, which was a very famous street for musicians back in the 20s and the 30s. And we had this great park in my neighborhood. But yeah, I was a Washington Heights girl.
What were your parents' names and what did they do for a living?
My mother's name was Juanita Uggams. I always laugh because her name was Juanita Smith. I was a Smith. And my father's name was Harold Coyden Uggams.
And what did they do for a living?
My mother was a waitress, and then I came along, and she was still waitressing for a while, and then I started doing a lot of things as a kid, and my father said, you have to be with her, so she quit her job. And my father did a little bit of everything. He always had 3 jobs. He was a college dropout.
Do you have any siblings?
I had a stepsister who was older than me from my mother's first marriage.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
They were fun people. They were also people, especially my dad said, I don't want to ever hear you say, I can't. Take that out of your vocabulary. You can be anything you want to be. He always instilled that in me. And he always also believed in education. And I came late in life for my parents, so that they were a little stricter than my friends' parents.
So what were some of your interests when you were little?
I was always singing and dancing, and at that time there were a lot of schools for kids to go and take tap and ballet and acting and singing. So I went to that kind of school, separate from my educational school that I went to. And I always loved music, and my mother played a lot of music. My mother had played the piano when she was a child, and my father had sung in the whole Johnson's choir, and my mother was a cotton club dancer for a short while. So there was always music in the house. The record player was always going with great legends who my parents admired, and so it was one of those musical families. My older sister, she also sang, so music was always a part of our life. So it was something that I took for granted that I always did. It was like breathing.
Who were some of the musicians that you liked to listen to?
Well, my mother had everything, and I started at the Apollo when I was 9 years old. So there was Louis Armstrong and Ella and Dinah, and Nellie Lutcher was somebody my mother liked, and Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra. In fact, my mother told me that when I started singing, the first thing I sang was this Frank Sinatra song, Nancy with the Smiling Face. So she had a little bit of everything. And of course, Lena. Lena was also big, very big.
So how did you get into performing at the Apollo?
Well, it happened because they had a radio show that was like an amateur hour, and a celebrity would bring a child on, and Thelma Carpenter brought me on, and I kept winning every week. And they couldn't get rid of me, so they decided to put an act together for me and put me on the Apollo stage. And at 9 years old, that's how I started, and the first person I worked with was Louis Armstrong.
Wow. Tell us about that.
It was so much fun, it was like my education. It's the best part of learning your craft that could possibly happen was playing the Apollo, because we did 29 shows a week. And so therefore you learned how to suck it up and do your show. And Pops, he was great. He embraced my mother and I, and along with his wife Lucille, and so we used to hang out at his house even when I wasn't playing the Apollo. And of course I used to watch every single performance of the artist that I was working for, whether it was Ella or Dinah. I would stand in the wings and just watch every single show.
Wow.
And then to get the opportunity to sometimes do a song with them as well. So it was a great experience. And I usually played there during the summertime and around Christmas time. And of course, those famous amateur hour shows that happened there. That was a great experience to see these people coming on and trying to win this contest and hope that they get to play the Apollo. And Ed Sullivan used to come up there every time there was a new show, and he had a special box that he would sit in, and it was like, oh wow, there's Ed Sullivan, and of course the experience of that audience, which was a very tough audience. So I always say the cliche, if you can make it at the Apollo, you can make it anywhere. So it was a great education for me.
So how did you get your start in television?
I started television even before the Apollo. At that time, there were a lot of dancing schools and stuff for kids, and producers. Television was early then, so they would go to all these different schools and pick out kids to audition for things. And so Milton Berle always had segments where he used kids, and my mother was told about this audition through the school that I was taking lessons from. And we turned up at the audition along with Gregory and Maurice Hines, who were like brothers for me. And Maurice and I used to get picked every time as two of the kids on the Milton Berle show. And that's how I started doing TV. And there were shows like Star Time, which was Connie Francis and I started. She was still playing the accordion then, as well as singing. And so there were all these different shows. Arthur Godfrey, I was on that. I won that contest, and I got an opportunity to be on his radio show. And then I was on a show called Your Show of Shows, which was Sid Caesar and Imogen Coca, and at 10 years old. And so I learned television very early because they used a lot of children.
So who was setting up these auditions for you? Did you have a manager?
No, didn't have a manager. It was, through the grapevine, all the parents knew where you were supposed to go to do, your audition and everything. And there was always some way that you found out, but you didn't have a manager then.
And then in 1951, you had a role on Beulah.
Yes, I was 6. And they needed somebody to play her niece, and I auditioned for that, and I got that role. And that was my first time on television.
Wow.
At 6 years old, working with her, and with Julie Wilson, who was the famous Sam in Casablanca. He played her boyfriend. And she also fell in love with me and was very sweet to me and my mother. And whenever she would perform, she would invite my mother and I to watch her sing at these soirees that she did. And in fact, she also introduced my mother to the woman who wound up making my clothes when I finally played the Apollo. So it was a great experience. I knew all about baseball. I remember that was the theme of me playing her niece, and the little boy that she worked for in the household, he was like shocked that I knew all about this baseball. You're a girl, how do you know about that?
So these were still the very early years of television. Had
Yes.
you actually watched much television at that point?
Well, when we finally could afford one, yes. I mean, that was like an event. We still had the rabbit ears and the thing, and the snow would come, and the parents would be trying to adjust the television set and everything. But yeah, very much so. We watched a lot of TV because that was a great form of entertainment, especially when my parents didn't make a lot of money. So, if I wasn't going to the Apollo, they couldn't afford to go and see all these shows. So television gave a great opportunity to see great performers that they admired.
I can already tell that this woman has done quite a lot with her life. Let me know in the comments, how big of a fan are you of Leslie Uggams?
What were some of the programs that you guys like to watch?
Well, Ed Sullivan was a big uh, part of our household, and Milton Berle, he had a very popular show, and Sid Caesar and Imogen Coca. There were three shows that I remember vividly when it came to the entertainment world.
When you were on those shows, did you have much interaction with Milton Berle and with Sid Caesar and Imogen?
No, not really. You know, they were busy doing their thing. And of course, remember, television was live then. So there was not, cut, we'll do it again. This was what you see is what you got. So they were very concentrated on doing the skits that they did. Carl Reiner and Howard Morris were writers, and Mel Brooks. And they would create these things while we were right there at rehearsal. So I got to see them do all this stuff. And the same thing with Milton Berle. They were too busy trying to get what the show and the different things that they wanted to do. But of course it was great because they had great stars that came on. Martha Ray, I remember she played it a lot while I was off and on doing the Milton Berle show. And so you didn't get to really interact. You might get a pat on the head, oh, you're a good kid. But interesting with the Milton Berle show, my mother was sitting watching me, whatever we were doing. It was a whole bunch of kids. And Milton Berle's mother used to be on the set. And she turned to my mother and she said, your kid has talent. And my mother said, how can you tell? There's so many kids here. She said, she has talent. So my mother was like, Milton Berle's mother said that you have talent. Because my parents, they did it because they thought, I was cute, but they really didn't think in terms of this is what I was going to be doing. My father had visions of me going to college and majoring in something, and this was kind of like, okay. Because I had an aunt that was in show business. She was on Broadway a lot, and he was kind of like, yeah, well, that's okay, but you got to get a real education.
So would you go to school on set, or were you attending a regular elementary school?
No, I was going to elementary school, and then in the third grade, the principal, Mr. Molesky, God rest his soul, finally said to my mother, because I was doing auditions or I was out doing something, he said, public school, you're not allowed to be able to do that. He said, but Leslie has some talent. He said, and there's a school called Professional Children's School that you should check out. And so we did, and I wound up going to Professional Children's School from elementary through high school. And it was a school for kids who were in the business or their parents were famous. And I wound up going to that school because I was all over the place doing all these shows and everything. And the great thing about it is they had a great curriculum so that when you were away, you could still have your lessons and do your work.
So another of the early shows that you were on was TV Teen Club. Do you recall that with Paul Whiteman?
Yes, vividly I remember that one. I was 7.
Tell us.
And it was a contest. And I had one more week, and then I would get that car, that Nash Rambler. I had won a refrigerator, the freeze. Each week we were winning stuff. But before I was on, there had been another African-American boy, tap dancer, who had won the contest. And so the sponsors decided that they did not want to give a car to another African-American kid. So it was me and a trumpet player, and the trumpet player won. But I watched from the stage, they had the meters in where they put their hands up, and they had tied the clock when it was my turn, so the clock couldn't move.
Oh, wow.
And now the funniest thing about it, I was very disappointed, and I had tears in my eyes, and my mother said, don't you cry, don't you worry about it. And then I laughed later on because my parents couldn't drive. So what were we going to do with the car? It was bad enough with the freezer. The building we lived in couldn't even take the thing. We had to wind up selling the freezer and the refrigerator. So it was not meant to be anyway.
How would you prepare for a vocal performance on television? Did you have a warm-up that you always did?
Well, most of the stuff that I was doing, other than when I was doing Martha Godfrey and those kind of shows, you weren't really doing anything where you needed to do a real warm-up. It wasn't until I got to be 12, 13 that I started really seriously taking singing, because I was just a natural singer. And then I learned, okay, you've got to preserve this, and you're doing certain things, and your voice has to be there when you do it. And then I had a great teacher, and he taught me certain things to do for warming up. His name was Donald Haywood. And Donald wrote a famous song called I'm Coming Virginia, which Tony Bennett has sung many times in his albums. And he was the one that I worked with, and he really, what I learned from him was just amazing. Because it was, it's like working like a prize fighter. It's not just this, it's all of this, And so that's when I started taking vocal lessons all the time.
Did you feel that you had a separate persona that you put on when you would go on stage?
Not really. I never thought about it. I just opened my mouth and sang, and and then back to the neighborhood to hang out with my friends.
So another of the early shows that you were on was Name That Tune.
Yes.
It's kind of a quiz show.
Yes.
Tell us about that experience.
Well, that was so bizarre because it was a show that came on like 7 o'clock, and my parents and we would watch the show, we were having dinner or something, and they said, if you send in a certain amount of songs, maybe your name will be picked and you can join whoever. And so as a lark, I just kind of wrote some songs in and did it. And then one night we're sitting there and they said to the guy, if you answer these 7 songs in a certain amount of seconds, your partner next week will be Leslie Uggams. And I was like, what? and he did answer them. I was so I remember running out of the house down to the corner, and there were some friends of mine who, everybody watched that show, and they said, they mentioned your name, I said, I know. And that's how I got on Name That Tune. So the first week I was there, they asked me, George DeWitt said, well, what do you like to do? And I said, I like to sing. And he said, oh, really? What do you like to sing? And I said, at the time I loved He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. He said, so sing it. So I sang it, and the mail that came in from the audience was unbelievable. So then they wanted me to sing the next week. And meantime, I'm trying to win the contest with this partner for college. And that's how I got discovered by Mitch Miller, because he kept hearing about this little chocolate girl that was on Name That Tune. And the night he tuned in, I was singing the Lord's Prayer. And then he had me come down to do some demonstration records he was head of Columbia Records at the time. And he liked the sound and signed me to a contract to record for Columbia. And when I was on Name That Tune, I was 15 and a half. And when I did my first album, it was on my 16th birthday.
Wow. What was that experience like of doing your first album?
Amazing. It was surreal. But the interesting thing, because I'd sang the Lord's Prayer, when I first signed with Mitch, he had me do a religious album, which is a beautiful album. I love that album. It's called The Eyes of God. But as I eventually stayed on there and he got the television show, then I was doing the American Songbook kind of songs. And so my other albums that came out were more for what I did on the show.
So let's talk about your work with Mitch Miller then. You were part of the original special for Forward Star Time with Mitch Miller.
Yes.
And then it later went to series as Sing Along with Mitch.
Which was another bizarre story because he had been trying to sell the show for 4 years and nobody was interested. They went 26 old guys singing, even though the albums was selling like crazy. And so NBC at the time had all these specials with these big stars, and they weren't really getting the ratings. And it just came down to, okay, well, put that show on that Mitch Miller's trying to sell us. And the rating went through the roof. And the next thing we know, they're saying, okay, you're going to have a regular show. So then at the time, we were like every 2 weeks, because it was Bell Telephone Hour was on 1 week, and then we were on the other week. And our ratings just kept climbing and climbing. And finally, they said, you're going to be on every week. And that's how it all happened. And I wasn't supposed to be a regular. But then again, the mail came in. And so Mitch said, you're going to be a regular. And that's how that happened.
Not too bad.
Not too bad.
So describe the show. What was the format of the show?
Well, it was a family show. It was basically, we all did songs and there was dancing. But then at the end was when they had to have the bouncing ball and the lyrics would come on and people at home could, sit and sing with their family. And that was a very big thing. It was a very family-friendly kind of show.
What was Mitch Miller like to work with?
He and I got along great, and he didn't have the best reputation from a lot of people that were big stars that worked with him. But he and I got along very well. We thought the same way. He picked the right material for me to sing, and up until he died, we were still close. He would come and see me wherever I was appearing. The last thing he saw me do was on Golden Pond with James Earl Jones, and he called me up. He used to call me Lester. So he called me and said, "Lester, I'm coming to see your show." I said, okay. He said, "And I need 4 tickets." And he said, "And I'm paying for them." I said, okay. He said, "And they got to be on the aisle." And he was like 90, 91 at the time. And he came to see the show. He loved it. And I had said to the guy in the door, I said, "Listen, he's old, so let me know, and I'll come downstairs. I don't want him to come upstairs to my dressing room." Because it's one of those old theaters where all the dressing rooms mainly were upstairs and there was only one downstairs. And so I'm wondering, okay, well, I know Mitch is here. Where is he? The next thing I know, there's a knock on the door and there's Mitch. I said, "What are you doing climbing this up?" "Oh, I'm fine. Oh, God, I love the show. It's so fabulous and everything." And I said, "Would you like to meet James?" He said, "I'd love to meet James." So we went downstairs. I introduced him to James, and James loved him. And they were just talking back and forth. He had the best time. And that was the last time he was able to see me perform. But we were neighbors, so I'd run into him at a Whole Foods. He would get his chicken. But he was terrific.
So he would pick the songs that you would perform?
For the show, yeah. He picked all the music for everybody that we would do each week.
Are there any favorite songs that you recall doing?
No, I mean, it was all good stuff. I did a lot of the Judy Garland stuff, and then we had a guest star once, Hoagie Carmichael, so I got to do his stuff. And then we had Irving Berlin, that was such a thrill. And so it was great music that he chose for me. One time there was a song I said to Mitch, "I want to sing this song. I love this song." And I think it was "Love for Sale" or something like that. And Mitch said, "You are not singing Love for Sale. Do you know what that song is about? You are too young to be singing that song."
So he's looking out for you a little bit.
Yes.
So who are some of the other regulars on the show?
Well, it was 26 sing-along men and 8 dancers and me. And every now and then we'd have another guest female artist that would come on. But basically it was just us.
Now, Bob McGrath was on the show.
Yes, he was the young member of the sing-along men. Mm-hmm. Yes, who went on to be very successful in Sesame Street.
And you actually did a Christmas special for Sesame Street years later.
Yes, I did a few of the Sesame Street shows.
So what was it like to be reunited with him?
Oh, it was wonderful. He was another one that was so happy with my success, and I was so happy with his success because, after singing along with Mitch, who knew what was going to happen with our careers and stuff. So whenever we saw each other, it was always a love fest. Just wonderful. He was such a wonderful and warm guy when we were doing Sing Along with Mitch anyway. So,
did you guys sing live on the show?
Not only did we not sing live, we lip sync. But you have to sing live to the lip sync, otherwise you're not singing. And we had been an Australian singer named Diana Trask, who was also one of the regulars on the show. Beautiful. And Diana wouldn't do a homework. So then it would come for her solo, and she'd be singing one thing to the track, and the lips would be going the other way, and Mitch would get so, you gotta be like Leslie. I'm thinking, oh, please don't make me the person that she's gonna hate. But because we recorded in a place downtown in the 30s, it was like a huge, huge place that had these high, high ceilings, and we had 32-piece orchestras then. So the music was great, and plus the fact that these songs were going into an album as well. So Mitch wanted it to be perfect when it came to the sound and everything. But the thing I learned immediately, and I couldn't up there just being mouthing, I had to sing. And I was just singing to myself, you know.
So did you guys have a lot of rehearsal to kind of nail that stuff down?
Well, it was a lot of rehearsals because then budgets were not as big as they are today, where every dollar counts. And so Mitch believed in rehearsing. So we would rehearse, do the show, and you maybe have a day off, and then it was time to start rehearsal for the next idea. And we had choreography, we had a lot. So it was a lot of rehearsal,
There were a lot of kind of sweeping camera movements on that show, too.
Yes, we had some great shots where the camera would be way up high like this, and then they would, you know, come down and do these all kinds of angles. And I forgot Bill's last name, but our director went on to do a lot of the Perry Como specials and stuff. Yeah.
Do you think the shows was better back then, or are they better now?
He won a lot of awards for that.
Talk a little bit about the wardrobe and costumes and makeup for the different routines.
Well, I mean, you know, God, I can't remember the wardrobe company that was very famous at the time, but they did all the shows. So, you know, you'd go in and you'd have to find out what it is to go with what you're going to be doing. And makeup, there were great makeup people. Of course, when I was on TV, there was two colors, and that was light Egyptian or dark Egyptian, because they just hadn't a lot of colors for black people then. And so, but the makeup people, you know, they did the best that they could, and the hairdressers. But what I loved about it, we were all family, and we used to shoot in a place in Brooklyn, 14th Street and Avenue M, I think it is. And there was a great Italian restaurant. So we couldn't wait for lunch break because everybody would like rush to this Italian restaurant. And that's the first time I had baked ziti. And it was so good, so good. And years later, I was doing a special about Gershwin with Jack Lemmon. And lunch break came. I said, Jack, you gotta go. It was called Luigi's. You gotta go to Luigi's. Get the baked ziti. And so he went over there and he came back and said, you're right. You're right.
Now, did you start to get recognized more when the show was on the air?
Oh, yeah. My world changed, you know. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to know my opinions about things and what I thought about things and what my life was like. And I was like, well, why do I have to tell you all this? So when I first started, the publicist would say, you have to say more than yes and no. They'd like to know a little bit more about you. So
can you imagine being recognized doing something that you love to do?
It was, you know, all of a sudden you walk down the street and you're being recognized. And of course, when I started, I carried my race. So I had to make sure that I conducted myself the proper way, because otherwise they consider everybody the way if I was not right. I mean, now today, the way people do things and everything is no big deal. But I mean, if you sneezed wrong, then you represented your whole race in a negative way. So I made sure that, not that I was like out there doing anything, but still.
So in our interview with Mitch Miller, he talked about how there were some objections to you being on the show because of your race.
Yes.
Were you aware of that at the
No,
time?
I didn't know 2 years later that the sponsors and the network were trying to get rid of me because the show wasn't being shown in the South. They had blacked it out, no pun intended. And naturally, they wanted it to be a nationwide show. And so they would come to him every week with a different scenario. Well, maybe if you would put her in her own thing, and then we could, like they did Lena in the movies, you could be able to cut her out in the South. And Mitch said, no. And then they would come up, well, okay. So do the sing-along men have to touch her? Because we did some great numbers together. And he said, we're a family. And they kept saying this. And finally he said, if it's no me, it's no show. And I had not been aware of any of this until years later when the show was over. And, you know, a lot of people would have come, you know, well, Mitch was so square. I said, you do not have to say anything negative about him to me ever, because he loved the show. He'd been trying to get it done for 4 years. So he took a chance saying to the network, no. And what happened? The South was so nosy that they had to find out about how fabulous this show was. And then the show was being shown in the South, and some of my best mail came from the South.
You mentioned they tied the clock meter so you couldn't win on the other show, but were there other instances where you felt discrimination, particularly in your early career?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, as a kid, there weren't a lot of young black kids that got an opportunity to be on television, and so therefore there were times where, you know, you go around the back way, not come in the front way, you know, that kind of thing. In fact, when I did the Beulah show, they wanted me to wear my hair in pickaninny braids, and my mother was like, what? And Ethel Waters said, you see how her mother has her hair? That's how she's going to be wearing her hair. You know, so it was still, you know, a lot of prejudice going on. And also remember that Nat King Cole had a show. It was a fabulous show. He had some of the top people that were guest stars in the show, and he couldn't get a sponsor. And so when I did Sing Along with Mitch, it was the first time nationally that you were seeing, you know, an African-American woman on every week in a singing situation. And so that was quite a step. But sure, when I first started out, absolutely.
So did you feel like you were breaking barriers when you were on Sing Along with Mitch?
I realized I was breaking barriers, absolutely. The funniest thing about it, though, is that in the black community, whenever one of us was on, we, you know, oh my God, quick, turn on the television. And so with me being on Mitch every day, it gave my people a chance to see somebody that looked like them. Because back then, there wasn't even commercials that you could see us in. So absolutely, I realized I was breaking barriers. But you know what? I've always been the kind of person that, because I think my father instilled in me is like, hello world, here I am, and aren't you lucky that I'm in the world? So I didn't get intimidated.
Now, you mentioned that the Ed Sullivan Show was one of the programs you liked to watch,
Yes.
and you were on it several
Yes,
times
a
in the
lot.
60s.
Yes,
So
yes.
tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was always fun, but you never knew with Ed whether you were going to be on the show, because Sunday afternoon, everybody would perform their number, and then he'd decide who was going to be on that night and who wasn't going to be on that night. Thank God I never got cut, but I remember I was sitting with a wonderful comedian, Toady Fields, and Toady says, oh, I hope Ed is not going to cut me. And I said, Toady, you're too funny. He's not going to cut you. She said, you know, you never know, because with comics, they were the ones that seemed to get cut. But she made the cut. I think we lost a magician that show, a juggler, whatever. But it was always great, and he was a fan of mine. He and you know, his son-in-law was one of the producers of the show, and they gave me a lot of great opportunities. Also, when I was on Broadway, I came on to sing something from Hallelujah Baby. But that was the show. If you want Ed Sullivan, oh my goodness! I remember I was on the show, and the Rolling Stones were on the show. And so, I mean, there's mobs of kids, you know, outside and everything. And all of a sudden, the doorman said, Miss Uggams, would you please come downstairs, please? And I go downstairs, and they said, there's somebody here, and it happened to be my cousin. And I said, oh, okay. So I opened the stage door, and I go, hi, how are you doing, Alita? It's so good to see you. She said, I'm not here to see you. I'm here to see the Rolling Stones. I was like, oh, well, thanks a lot.
Now, also in the 60s, you started to do some appearances as an actor on TV shows. So you were on I Spy in the 60s.
That's right. That was a funny situation because I played an Italian girl. And the director, one day he said, you know, you need to speak more with an Italian accent. So then I would talk kind of with an Italian. It wasn't a good Italian accent. And then the next day he said, no, forget about the Italian accent. So in that whole thing, it's like, what are you doing? I had no idea what I was doing. But it was a great experience because we did it over in Italy. So that was fabulous to go over there and do it over there. And I remember having a lunch break. And when they have a lunch break, they have a lunch break. And then we all got little bottles of wine. And I was like, how does anybody get any work done here with the wine and the thing? And it was like 2 hours later. And then they said, okay, we'll go back to filming. And I was like, this is crazy. This is crazy.
Were you actively trying to pursue kind of more dramatic roles at that time?
Well, what people don't realize, I had studied acting since I was 8. My first class, I was in class with Sal Mineo, So I was taking serious acting lessons. And so off and on, I was always studying with someone. At one point, I was studied with Bobby Lewis of Actor Studio, one time too. But the one that really did it for me was Stella Adler, who I met through my husband when I was doing Hallelujah Baby. And my husband said, well, I got some free time. Let me see what this world is all about. My wife is, on stage and everything. And she thought he was the next Marlon Brando. And she really wanted him to do his thing. But my husband said, you know what? I'm not doing this. Maybe if I was real young teenager, I might be interested in doing this. But we formed a great friendship with her as well. So then I started studying with her. And she said to me, when you perform a song, you're acting. So you can act. And I worked with her, and she changed my life, And I always remember she said, never be boring. And it was a great opportunity. And we just adored her. And we lived in the city, and then we moved to California, and then in the summertime she would teach a class out in California, and she would always invite us to have dinner with her. And so one night, she always stayed with Marlon Brando. So she invited Graham and I to come up to the house, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna be Marlon Brando, this is so exciting. He never came out of the bedroom. We were there for hours and talking and things, and I said, where's Marlon Brando? She said, he's in the bedroom, he never comes out. So we never got to meet him.
Now, we talked a little bit about breaking barriers. This was the era of the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. What role do you think television played in the movement?
Well, I mean, little by little, you certainly saw more of us because people became aware that things had to change. And so you saw changes happening slowly, but they started to realize that also money talks. We buy a lot of products. And they finally realized, oh my goodness, we need to start showing people that reflect these people because they're buying all the hairsprays and the cereals and things like that. And finally, things slowly started to change, but slowly. But it did make a impression on them because our voices now were being heard and it was being seen on television what America, which is supposed to be this fabulous country, were treating people of color.
Mm-hmm. Now, you got your own show, variety series in 1969, the
Yes.
Leslie Uggams Show. Did you see that as kind of playing a part in civil rights in the movement in any way?
Yes and no. At the time, I had a deal with CBS to come up with a sitcom. And then all of a sudden, the Smothers Brothers got fired because they were being too political. And the next thing I know, my agent is saying, oh, you're going to have your own show. And I'm like, oh, yeah, what? He said, you're going to have your own variety show. And I said, okay. I thought we were talking about the acting thing here. And they said, no. And you're taking over from the Smothers Brothers. And I said, what? So it was a great opportunity, but very political. Mm. But you want to talk about civil rights. What they put me through just before I ever did a show was unbelievable, because I mean, if I had different wigs on or different things on, because you're not beautiful enough, we have to do this. And the head of the network at the time, I remember my manager and we went to lunch with him, and I'll never forget, he said, well, you're not so bad looking. You're not pretty, but we'll do something with you. And I was like, well, welcome to CBS. And I mean, it put me so many changes before I even got on the air. But the one thing that I was determined to do was, okay, you got me here. I had a black cameraman that had never happened before. I had a black choreographer, Donna McHale. We had an integrated dancers, Latino, black, white, doing dancing on the show. And I had a fabulous writer by the name of John Amos, who helped write the sketch that we did in the show called Sugar Hill. And the conductor of the music was black. So we had a lot of us represented on the show. It only lasted 10 weeks, but it was 10 weeks that we got people that were talented to be able to be with me.
Did the network have input in the guests?
They had input in some ways, but I brought flavor. I remember when I had Sly and the Family Stone, because I was at up, and they didn't know what hit them at CBS, because Sly and that whole family, they were in a haze and they were crazy, but it was such good entertainment. I had the Temptations, I had Stevie. I said, this is what I'm about. The other people are wonderful, but this is what I'm about. And then we had the Sugar Hill segment.
Yeah, what was that?
Which was pre Good Times in a way, and it was very popular with the audience, and it was great. And I was lucky because the woman who played my mother in that sketch also played my mother on Broadway, Hallelujah Baby, Lillian Heyman, who I'd known since I was 6 because she and my Aunt Eloise did Porgy and Bess together. And so therefore it was like having family there. And another friend of mine, Kilpatrick, he played my husband. And I'd known him because he was in Porgy and Bess too, and along with his wife. So it was like having good family around you.
Did you get mail from viewers?
I never really saw any mail from CBS. So I'm sure there were people out there that were not thrilled about it, but we had a heck of a rating. But unbeknownst to us, we were not there to be there. We were there to take the heat off the fact that this very popular show called The Smothers Brothers, and they had been fired. So you bring in a black woman, and so therefore that shut that up. They were very clever in shutting that up. And but they had plans for Hee Haw, which was, they were doing in the basement rehearsing. And the next thing, I'm sitting in the dentist's office and I find out we've been canceled. I'm going, oh, well, that's nice. And then I got home and somebody said, you don't know me, but. And I thought, this is terrible. What a way to tell somebody they don't have the show anymore. Not even face to face. You got to read it and you need somebody on the phone and everything. But those 10 weeks that I did it was a great experience. And I learned a lot. And many, 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 many years later, I'm at a function, and that same person that put me through, I'm not pretty, I'm not this, and all like that, we wound up sitting at a table together because I was doing some kind of fundraiser, and all the networks were there, and I was one of the presenters and stuff like that. And he said to me, oh, you were always so beautiful. My husband and I looked at each other and said, really? I don't remember that part at all.
You had mentioned the Nat King Cole show. There were a few other shows that were headlined by African Americans, but they were all men. You were the first woman to headline her own variety show.
Yes. So that was something. Mm-hmm. That was major, and that's how I met Bob Mackie, and Ray Aguion. That was great. I met great designers who later on went on to do my clothes. But yeah, it was something to have that opportunity. And I just went in there, tried to do the best shows we could possibly do. We knew that we were having some problems rating-wise compared to what they wanted and everything like that, but we did great shows. The sad thing about it is, I think a few of them you might be able to see, but they never really showed the whole 10 weeks experience.
What do you think is the legacy of the Leslie Uggams Show?
That we did great work. I have people that come up to me and they say, "Look, oh, we remember your show. We loved your show." And we were a show within a show, because I said we had that family segment, and it was very, very funny. And we were hoping that segment would maybe go on to be a show. But Good Times came, and we would like similar in a way to that. And of course, Norman Lear, that's a whole different, story and everything. But everybody that comes up to me today that watched that show or said, "Oh, that was such a good show. We didn't understand why it went off the air." So I'm all about trying to do the best work possibly, and I think we accomplished that, and people got to see somebody that looked like them as well, and I think that's a great legacy to leave.
Mm-hmm. Now, you appeared on a number of variety series and talk shows as well. So we just wanted to name a few of the people that you worked with on those shows, and have you just tell us some stories or whatever you recall.
Okay.
So we'll start with Sammy Davis Jr.
Oh, I love Sammy. First of all, when I was growing up, Sammy Davis Jr., even before when he was the Will Maston Trio and then he went out on his own, was like, oh my God, he's the greatest entertainer of all. And then to know him as a friend as well, it was like unbelievable. So we were always very comfortable with Sammy. And I remember my husband and I were newlyweds, and we were going to look at an apartment. And Sammy was married to my Brit at the time. And so, of course, it was like, oh, similar situations we have here. And it was during a lunch break, and we said, oh, Sammy, we're going to go look at an apartment, and we'll see you when we come back. And so we go to this apartment. It's on the east side, and I'm in a mink coat with my husband. And the doorman kind of said, okay, so can I help you? And Graham says, yeah, we're here to look at the apartment such and such and such. And the guy gets on the intercom. He said, there's a white man here with his maid. I thought to myself, a maid in a mink coat? She must be doing well. And so then we go up, and the woman opens the door, and she's like, first of all, I think she recognized me, and then she was like, oh my God. And I thought to myself, we're going to be in this building. Nix that. And we came back, we told Sammy the story, and he said, see? But I loved working with Sammy. It was just a joy, and loved hanging out with him. And, he was such an entertainer that you could only learn from watching him.
Tell me in the comments, what did you love most about Sammy? Was it his acting or was it his music? For me, myself, I loved his acting. It was a Christmas movie he was in was my absolute favorite.
And he was just a sweet, sweet man. And Maya was a wonderful woman. So that was a great experience.
Flip Wilson.
Flip, he was different. I mean, he was fun, but he was very quiet. So I didn't get to really know him. But of course, you're on a top show, and that Geraldine character that he created was just amazing. So that was fun to do.
So his show lasted a little longer than some of the others.
Oh, yeah. He was a huge success. He was on for quite a while. The show could have kept going, I'm sure, if I think he wanted to finally pursue other things. But, that Geraldine character, people were like tuned in every week. They wanted to see him do that character.
Mm-hmm. Dean Martin.
Oh, I love Dean Martin. What a gentleman. Everybody thought, he was, but there was tea in that. He wasn't it. But did that persona and everything. And he loved having me on the show. So I got to do it more than once. And one of the dancers from Sing Along with Mitch was one of the girls that was on his show, the blonde one that they used to do a lot of comedy with her. But he was terrific to, sing with, and he just loved me. He could go, "Oh, Leslie, I love doing duets with you." And he was just a special, special man. It was so sad when he lost his son, because he was never the same after that, when Dino got killed in that plane crash. And they were so close, But to work with him was such a joy, such a joy.
Johnny Carson.
Johnny Carson, now, I met Johnny when I was like 17, 18. They used to have these functions, and they'd have different people sitting on the dais. And because I was on Sing Along with the Mitch, I was one of the people. And I always wound up sitting next to Johnny Carson, who then was a wild and crazy person. Then, of course, when I got to be more famous and everything, he loved having me on the show. And if you got to sit down on the panel, that meant something. So he would have me sit down there and we would talk. But you never really got to know Johnny. But when I knew him, he was wild and crazy when I first met him. But then, he stopped drinking and all that stuff, and then he became, more of a statesman. But it was great working with him. He liked good singing.
Jimmy Durante.
Oh, well, I was just, really too young to really know what he was all about. So I was very comfortable with him. But he was amazing, absolutely amazing. A lot of these people are funny, though. They're very quiet in their own kind of way. So he was not, the person that you saw on television, and that kind of thing. But that was thrilling, because as a kid you saw those movies, and I'm going, I can't believe it. I'm with Jimmy Durante. When I look back at people I work with, I go, girl, wow.
Frank Sinatra.
FS. FS. He was the man. He was the man. But he was tough. You better bring it. He was tough. And when I did that special with him, I was in Vegas rehearsing Guys and Dolls. And I'm going to be with Frank Sinatra in his special. So Bob Mackie made me this fabulous dress and this turban thing. So it was going to be, it was me, Natalie Cole, and Loretta Lynn. And then John Denver, Dean Martin, I forgot who the third person was. But they shot the women in one day. So I come there and I'm dressed and made up and everything. And somebody knocks on my door and opened the dressing room door, and they said, Frank is not in a good mood. What? What happened? I said, well, he had a little problem with somebody earlier, and Frank only liked to do one take. And he wound up doing like 7 takes. And so he was not happy. And I said, oh no, because he and I are going to do this fabulous duet of Lady is a Tramp and everything, and I got this dress, so as I'm walking out of the dressing room, Frank is coming out of his dressing room. And I said, I heard you had a fabulous day. And he looked at me and he started laughing. And so then we went on and did our number, and it was great. But I had sung at a few functions that he had been at, and he'd say to the audience, that girl can sing. She's fabulous. So that was a thrill.
Was there anyone in particular that you loved doing duets with?
Well, Frank, that was like killer. You are making history with him, and he had a certain groove, and you had to make sure that for you to work well together to do that groove. But I 3 years old, my mother said I was singing his song. So for me, this was like, I'm singing with Frank Sinatra.
In 1968, you won a Tony for Hallelujah Baby, and you were also on the Tony Award broadcast many times throughout the years.
Yes.
What does it mean to you to be a part of the Tonys?
Well, to me, it's part of being part of the theater. The award is great, and it's wonderful to be recognized, but there's something about when you are part of the actors and actresses who are part of the theater, you're like a family. And to win your first time out, I didn't realize it then because I was still very green about that whole process. The first day of rehearsal, I had memorized the whole script. I didn't realize that you're supposed to sit down and you talk about things. But I knew my lines already, and they all looked at me like, oh, she's going to be trouble. And the people that I got to work with, Comden Green and Julie Stein, that was a great lesson every time we had a rehearsal. Then when the awards and the nomination, it didn't sink in, when people say, oh, congratulations, I didn't get it. And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been nominated for the award. Then I was like, oh, and to be in company of people who had done many Broadway shows, I was just honored. And then to hear my name, it just blew me away. And it was just a most, I don't even have words for it. It's just like you're walking on air because you're going, I got a Tony Award, And it validated me for this kid that new on the block, all of a sudden that producers and directors take you more seriously. And so it's quite an honor when you win that award.
Groucho Marx, I think, actually handed you the award.
He handed me an award. He never stopped talking. I never got to thank anybody because he was still doing his shtick. I wanted to, this is my moment.
Were there lessons that you learned on the stage that you brought to television or vice versa?
Well, when you do theater, it's a whole different animal because you start from the beginning to the end. And it's a lot of discipline. It's a lot of, these are the lines. You can't make up your lines. You have to do this because otherwise you throw the other person off. Whereas when you're doing a television show, you can kind of wing things. You have a certain format and there's certain things you can do. But if something you feel a certain way about something might work a little better, you can do that. You can't do that in theater because you got the orchestrations, you got the people that you're working with, the choreographer. You can't decide, I'm going to do this step now and, to throw everybody off. So the discipline for theater, I love because you create something. In fact, my favorite part of it is the rehearsal part because that's when we all get to know each other and we sit down and we work on the character and we do the script and you're getting your costume fittings and then you're hearing the orchestra for the first time, and then once the show goes up, you see everybody when you come in at certain time for the show, whereas before that we're all together all the time. But that's a discipline that I always think if people can do theater first before they do movies and things like that, they would learn a lot from doing the theater experience.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a short break and then we'll come back and talk about Roots.
Okay.
All right.
You have just watched Leslie Uggams' interview, part 1 of 2. Let me know what you think about it in the comments.